Okay, class, this is going to be a quick overview of keyframe editing in Premiere. So this video will cover kind of 3 steps here. We're going to look at importing Photoshop docs into Premiere, keyframing, linear versus Bezier motion, and then the anchor points. So let's jump in with the importing process. Now in Premiere, you can create graphics within Premiere without using any other application. That's with the type tool and with the pen tool. You can do that. I've got a new project here, so there's nothing in here yet. I'm going to go ahead and bring in a Photoshop document. Let's look at the document real quick and see what's there. Here's my Photoshop doc. Over here on the right side, we can see that there's 6 layers in this document. And it's already been saved. I've got it saved on my hard drive in a space next to my video. And so I'm going to bring that into Premiere. File, Import. I'm going to navigate to, it's in my footage folder right there. And there it is right there. So hit Import. Now this is new. I'm going to get this prompt that allows me to bring in a Photoshop doc multiple ways. The first 2 will flatten the Photoshop document as if it's like a flat photo with no layers. I don't want that. And there's very few scenarios where I would want that. The 2 in the bottom will keep the Photoshop document separate into pieces. However, the most convenient one is the last one that says sequence. So I'm going to choose that. And there it's previewing all those different layers. I'm going to say OK. And when this comes into Premiere, if I use that last setting there, this is what Premiere will do for me. So I can see each layer is inside this bin. And if I double click, I can see the different layers up there in my source. But what I really like is that it will also create a sequence with all the layers loaded in correctly. They're loaded in the correct order, the same as the Photoshop document, in a sequence. Now the hitch is that I wouldn't want to leave this here, and I would want to rename the sequence. So I would call this, sequence, and just give it a name so you know what it is. I'm going to call this, plus and circle graphic. I'm going to make a bin for my sequences, and I want to keep these separate. I don't want sequences and either footage or other materials commingling. Okay, so I've got my sequences separated, and now I can begin the keyframing portion. So what's important to know at the beginning is whichever layer is highlighted, if I double click it and load it into the source monitor, that's when I'm keyframing, and I'm going to be keyframing it by itself. So you have to keyframe each one individually. So let's start with basic linear motion. So let's just put a T on it. There's linear motion, and then there's Bezier. Linear motion just means that there's no ramping. It just starts, stops, and it travels at an even speed. Let's do an edit. So I'm gonna load this first layer in by double clicking it. It loads in my source monitor. I'm gonna use the effects controls. These controls will only affect that layer, that pink rectangle. To initiate a keyframe edit, I'm gonna start on a parameter. I'm gonna choose position, and I start the clock. I push the clock button, and when I do that, it will create a keyframe. Now the keyframes are very small. And this is why it's hard, is because you don't have big, robust controls. You have these very sort of precise, small things you have to move around. That's a keyframe right there, a little diamond. And this keyframe is recording these parameters. It's holding these parameters. So whatever these 2 parameters are, they will be recorded in this point. So right now, those are in this point. Wherever I move the point, that point is holding that same information. So I'm going to move my playhead forward, and I'm going to change the parameters. I'm going to move the rectangle across the screen to the left. And now the system automatically created a new keyframe that is recording these parameters, the new parameters. And if I move between the keyframes, this keyframe is holding the previous parameters. And as I move to the new keyframe, it moves across to those new numbers that I put in. Now, that's linear motion. If I look at this right now, if I push play, oops, it's a little stuttery. Let me do that one more time. If I push play, the motion starts abruptly, it proceeds at an even pace, and it stops abruptly. If we drop the Bezier, if we drop this tab down right here, we can actually see the speed. So it just starts, goes even speed, and stops, right? That's fine. So if I want smooth starts and smooth stops, I need these to be Bezier, and Bezier just means curves, right? Now I can do it manually, but let's start over. I'm going to delete these. Kill that one too. I'm going to move my playhead back. I'm going to start the clock again. I'm going to just push that until I get a keyframe. I've got my new keyframe right there. Now I'm going to right click on the keyframe and I'm going to change it. I'm going to say, well, in the temporal interpolation, which is just such a silly phrase. I love it, but it's not clear at all. It just means you want to be able to adjust the time. So I want Bezier right there. Now the keyframe's going to look different. It's going to look like an hourglass right there. If I drop that down, I'm going to go forward. I'm going to put in new coordinates for this position. I'm going to move the rectangle across. And now you can see that I'm getting a curve instead of a straight line. And if it's Bezier, I can continue editing this to smooth out the motion. Now here's the quirk of Premiere. If we look at this motion right now, it's going to start slowly, accelerate, level off, and then it's going to hard stop. If we look at that motion on the screen, right? So the quirk of Premiere is that even though I set this to Bezier, this is not smooth right here. And so what I would do is I take this handle, and I just need to move the handle to smooth that curve out. And I can continue editing the curve by just pulling the handle in and out. And what I'm doing is changing the time. So let's just do an edit here. If I pull this one way out, I pull this one way out. What I'm telling the system is when the motion starts here, I want it to start slowly and build until it peaks here. This is the fastest motion. And then I want it to ramp down to a much slower end. And if we look at that, that's what that looks like. And you can continue editing these handles to get the feel you want. Now, very importantly, you can move the keyframes infinitely. If you decide that this is moving, the whole thing is happening too fast, so it's going from here to here too quickly. If I just move the keyframe out, now that entire move will be slower, right? And you can move those till your heart is content. Now, one of the techniques that's very handy is to use existing keyframes on other parameters to get the same timing. So instead of going down here, if I say I wanted to do rotation, and again, I'd hit the clock, I would right click on the keyframe, choose Bezier. Instead of just grabbing the playhead and guessing and saying, well, I want somewhere here, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use the existing keyframe right there. I'm going to match the timing, but the way I'm going to move to that keyframe is by using these guys right here, these little arrows. So the most precise way you can move and be dead on a keyframe is by hitting the arrows. If I click this, it will jump to the next keyframe. If there is no keyframe, it won't do anything, right? And by doing that, I know that I'm on top of this one. Now, with that there, I can come back down to my rotation parameter, and I can do an edit. I'm going to make it rotate. And now I know that these two keyframes are in the exact same position because I used this to line these two keyframes up. I hope that makes sense, right? Now, we just discovered something new there, and that is that when that thing's rotating, for some reason it's rotating in this strange way. And that is because the anchor point also needs to be edited. Let's look at that. If I highlight anchor point, and we look at the screen, you'll see that there's a little crosshair right there. And there's an anchor point on every piece of the graphics. If I switch, this is the orange rectangle. If I go to its effects panel and I click anchor point, you'll see that it's floating right there in the middle. Now what this means is that this is essentially the axis that particular graphic element is going to rotate on. So what's happening with this pink one right now is that the anchor point is here, and so when it rotates, it's rotating off that axis like this. And I can edit the anchor point. It's very simple actually. If I highlight anchor point and I just go to the crosshair and use the selection tool to move it, I can change the position. So I'm going to put it in the center. And now if I rotate, it will spin off that anchor point. So now let's look at this again. I'm going to push play. And now it's spinning the way I would expect it to. It's spinning from the center, right? Okay, very importantly, again, if you want to edit a keyframe, especially if you want to edit the parameters, if I want to change this keyframe, it's very difficult to move the playhead precisely on top of it. It's easy to miss it. And if I miss it and I change this, it's going to make a new keyframe with different information. So now I've got two there and I don't want that. So I'm going to delete one. If I use these arrows, I move very precisely between keyframes. And that's the best way to edit one. So now if I want to go back to this keyframe and change the parameters, I'm going to use those arrows. And now I can change the values here. And I'm editing this keyframe. And it will hold that new information. So now that looks like this. Okay. Now, you can also copy paste keyframes. So if you like, if you've done one layer and you want to do the same thing to another layer, you don't need to do all that work again. All you have to do is copy paste. So I'm going to take my selection tool. I'm going to drag a box around those keyframes. I'm going to Command C, copy. And I'm going to go to a new layer. I'm going to go to this orange rectangle here. I'm going to pull my playhead back because it's going to paste to wherever the playhead is. I'm going to pull this back. I'm going to move its anchor point. So turn that on. I'm going to move its anchor point, this is the orange one, to the center. I'm going to come back here and click. And now if I paste here, those keyframe values have been pasted in, and it will now affect the orange rectangle. So if I push play, it also rotates and it moves to the same position. Now what I can do is I can continue editing these. I can say, well, I want these two things to move with a little bit of an offset so they're not so precisely stuck together. So I'm going to kind of scoot in here. I'm just going to pull these forward 3 or 4 frames like this. And now they're going to move at slightly different times, but they'll come back together. And I can keep playing with that, infinitely. I can change the timing again. I'm going to pull forward again. Right? So those are really the basics of keyframe editing. The trick with it is to try and figure out the timing on one layer and then use that layer to set up the other ones. So you're sort of duplicating a lot rather than going through all the steps on every single layer. You're sort of copying and pasting your points. Okay? Well, I hope that helps. I hope it makes it slightly clearer. Over and out.